I was feeding a blind old woman at the bus stop when her daughter grabbed my wrist and spoke words that sent ice through my veins. My mother is a clairvoyant. She asked me to tell you, don't get in your husband's car today. I only smirked. I had no idea that in 3 hours those words would save my life and expose a betrayal that had been planned for months. But it didn't start that day. It started 6 months earlier, the moment I first felt that something was wrong. The September morning was warm and lazy, one of those deceptive reminders of summer. I stood in the kitchen, watching sunlight pierce through white curtains and dance across the countertop. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of apple pie I'd baked the night before, a habit left over from my grandmother. A good home always smells like something homemade, she used to say. Andre came down the stairs, fastening his watch around his wrist. My husband always moved with purpose, with confidence. A former military man, he maintained that bearing even in civilian life. But in recent months, I'd noticed something new in his movements: nervousness. He constantly checked his phone, turned away when typing messages, and his gaze would slide past me as if I were translucent. "Leaving early this morning," he said, kissing the top of my head. His lips were cold. "Meeting with investors. I'll be back by lunch." "Okay," I replied, but something pricked inside. Maybe it was the intonation, or the way he quickly averted his eyes. Andre ran a construction business, a small firm he'd been building for the past 5 years. Things were going well, at least that's what he said. We lived in a 2-story house on the outskirts of town, which I'd inherited from my parents. The house was my pride. Wooden beams, a fireplace in the living room, a porch where you could sit in the evenings with a book and listen to the rustle of leaves. This house was my fortress, and I had my job at the city library. Quiet, peaceful, filled with the smell of old books and the creak of wooden shelves. I loved my life. I thought Andre loved it too. But over the past 6 months, cracks had been appearing more frequently. The first warning bell rang in March when I accidentally saw a message on his phone screen from his mother, Lyudmila Petrovna. "Everything is going according to plan. The documents are almost ready. The main thing is that she doesn't suspect anything." I froze. My fingers clenched around the teacup so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Who? She?" I wanted to ask, but my tongue wouldn't obey. Andre quickly grabbed his phone and shoved it in his pocket, muttering something about problems with contractors. I nodded. I always nodded. Lyudmila Petrovna had never liked me. From the very first meeting 7 years ago, she looked at me as if I were an unwelcome guest at her own son's wedding. "She's not from our circle," I once overheard her whisper to Andre's sister. "Too quiet, too simple." But Andre had defended me then. He'd held my hand and said, "She's perfect for me, Mom." Now I wasn't so sure he still believed that. Over the following weeks, the strange behavior intensified. Andre started coming home late, always with the same excuse: problems at the construction site. His phone buzzed constantly, but when I glanced at the screen, he'd angle it away. Once, I walked into his home office and found him hunched over his laptop, frantically closing tabs. The brief glimpse I caught showed legal documents, something about property transfer. "What are you looking at?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just boring paperwork," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Nothing interesting." But his hands trembled slightly as he closed the laptop. That tremor told me more than any words could. Then came the incident with the keys. It was a humid evening in May. I was watering the plants on the porch when Lyudmila Petrovna's car pulled into our driveway. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the concrete with that sharp, deliberate rhythm she always maintained. She wore a cream-colored suit and pearl earrings, always dressed as if attending a business meeting, even for casual visits. "Inna, darling," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Is Andre home?" "He's in the shower," I replied, setting down the watering can. "Would you like to come in?" "No need." She opened her handbag and pulled out a set of keys, our house keys. I made copies. For emergencies, you understand, in case something happens to you or Andre. The way she said you made my skin crawl. Not you both, not either of you, just you. That's thoughtful, I managed, taking the keys from her outstretched hand. But we already have a spare set with my sister. Well, now I have a set too. Her eyes were hard, calculating. We're family, after all. Family should always have access. Access. The word hung in the air like a threat. After she left, I stood on the porch for a long time, staring at those keys. They felt heavy in my palm, heavier than they should. Something about them was wrong. The weight, the texture, even the smell of fresh-cut metal. These weren't just copies. They were... what? A declaration of ownership? A warning? That night, I changed all the locks. I didn't tell Andre. When his mother inevitably tried to use her keys and found them useless, I wanted to see his reaction. The reaction came 3 days later. Andre stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. "Why did you change the locks without telling me?" "I didn't know I needed your permission to secure my own house," I said quietly, continuing to chop vegetables for dinner. "Your house?" His voice cracked. "It's our house, Inna." "Is it?" I set down the knife and turned to face him, because lately it feels like everyone has more say in what happens here than I do. Your mother makes copies of keys without asking. You have secret meetings with investors you never mention, and I'm supposed to just... what? Smile and pretend everything is normal? He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But then it was gone, replaced by that blank, evasive look I'd grown to hate. "My mother was just trying to help," he muttered. "Help with what, exactly?" Silence. The kind of silence that screamed louder than any argument. The next strange incident happened in June. I came home from work to find Andre and his mother sitting at our dining table, papers spread between them. They stopped talking the moment I walked in, and Lyudmila Petrovna shuffled the documents into a folder with practiced efficiency. "Inna!" Andre's smile was too bright, too forced. "We were just discussing some business matters." "In our dining room?" I set down my bag, my heart pounding. "What kind of business matters?" "Boring stuff," Lyudmila Petrovna interjected smoothly. "Investment opportunities. Nothing you need to worry your pretty head about." There it was again. That patronizing tone, that dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand, as if I were a child who couldn't possibly understand adult conversations. I walked closer to the table, trying to catch a glimpse of the papers, but Lyudmila Petrovna had already tucked them into her leather briefcase. All I saw was a flash of official-looking letterhead, something with the words, "Power of Attorney," at the top. "Actually, I'd like to know," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If it involves our household, I have a right to be informed." Andre stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Mom, maybe we should continue this at your place." "Good idea." Lyudmila Petrovna rose gracefully, smoothing her skirt. She paused at the door, turning back to fix me with a cold smile. "You know, Inna, Andre has been under so much stress lately. The business isn't doing as well as he'd hoped. He needs support, not complications." Complications. She said it like I was a problem to be solved. After they left, I searched Andre's office. I knew it was a violation of trust, but trust was already shattered. I needed to know what was happening in my own home, in my own marriage. I found nothing. Either he'd taken everything with him, or he was better at hiding secrets than I'd thought. July brought the first real confrontation. I was organizing files in the library when my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Sokolova?" A man's voice, professional and clipped. "This is Dmitry Volkov from the city registry office. I'm calling about the property transfer application for 47 Maple Street." My breath caught. 47 Maple Street. My house, our house. I didn't file any application, I said slowly. A pause. According to our records, the application was submitted 2 weeks ago with your signature. We're calling to confirm the details before processing. What details? The transfer of ownership from Inna Mikhailovna Sokolova to Andrei Nikolaevich Sokolov and Lyudmila Petrovna Sokolova. Equal shares, 50% each. The world tilted. I gripped the edge of my desk, my vision blurring at the edges. That's not possible. I never signed anything. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Sokolova, if you're claiming the signature is fraudulent, you'll need to file a formal complaint. I'd suggest bringing your identification documents and coming to our office as soon as possible. I will. Thank you. I ended the call, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. They were trying to steal my house, my inheritance, the one thing my parents had left me, and Andrei, my husband, the man I'd trusted with everything, was helping his mother do it. The rage came slowly, building from a cold knot in my stomach. Not the hot, explosive anger that makes you scream and throw things. This was different. This was ice in my veins, sharp and clarifying. This was the moment I stopped being the woman who nodded and smiled and pretended everything was fine. I called my sister, Elena. She was the only person I could trust completely, my younger sister, fierce and protective, who'd never liked Andrei's mother from the start. I need a lawyer, I told her, a good one, today. What happened? I told her everything, the message on Andrei's phone, the keys, the mysterious documents, and finally, the phone call from the registry office. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then, I'm coming over. Don't confront him alone. We need evidence first. She arrived an hour later with a friend, Mikhail, a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and fraud cases. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. First things first, Mikhail said, setting his briefcase on my kitchen table. We need to get copies of whatever documents they submitted. If the signature is forged, we'll need a handwriting expert, and we'll need to freeze any further transactions on the property immediately. How long will that take? If we move fast, a few days. But Inna... He leaned forward, his expression serious. You need to understand what you're up against. If your husband and his mother have been planning this for months, they likely have backup plans. Legal battles with family members get ugly. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my grandmother's house, about the porch where I'd spent countless evenings, about the garden my mother had planted. I thought about 7 years of marriage, of trust given and betrayed. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. Over the next 3 days, I became someone I didn't recognize. The quiet librarian who avoided confrontation transformed into a strategist. With Mikhail's help, I gathered evidence. We obtained copies of the fraudulent documents from the registry office, and sure enough, my signature had been forged. The handwriting was close, but not quite right. Too careful, too precise. My real signature had a slight upward slant. This one was perfectly level. We filed an injunction to freeze all property transactions. We hired a private investigator to track Andrei's movements and financial records. And slowly, piece by piece, the full picture emerged. Lyudmila Petrovna had been planning this for over a year. She'd convinced Andrei that I was holding him back, that my inherited house should be invested in his failing business. The construction company wasn't just struggling, it was drowning in debt. Andrei had taken loans he couldn't repay, made promises to investors he couldn't keep. His mother's solution was simple: use my property as collateral, and if I wouldn't agree willingly, they'd forge the documents and do it anyway. The private investigator uncovered bank transfers. My house had already been appraised and offered as security for a loan of 2 million rubles. The money had been transferred to an account in Lyudmila Petrovna's name. They were going to sell it, Mikhail explained, spreading the financial records across the table. Once the transfer went through, they'd have legal ownership. Then they'd sell the house, pay off Andre's debts, and split whatever was left. You'd have been left with nothing. Elena's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. What happens now? Now, Mikhail said, a grim smile touching his lips. We destroy them. But the universe, it seemed, had its own plans. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, 6 months after that first suspicious text message. I was running late for work, rushing to the bus stop with my bag slung over my shoulder. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and approaching rain. At the bus stop sat an old woman, blind, with milky white eyes and weathered hands that clutched a small paper bag. She looked frail, hunched over on the bench, and something in me, maybe the memory of my grandmother, made me stop. "Are you all right?" I asked gently. She turned her head toward my voice, those unseeing eyes somehow finding me. "Hungry," she whispered. "So hungry." I had a sandwich in my bag, intended for lunch. I pulled it out and placed it carefully in her hands. "Here, eat." Her fingers closed around the sandwich with surprising strength, and she began to eat with small, grateful bites. A younger woman, perhaps 40, with the same sharp cheekbones and thin frame, appeared from behind the bus shelter. "Mama," she scolded gently, "I told you to wait for me." Then she turned to me, her expression softening. "Thank you. She wanders sometimes. It's hard to keep track." "It's no problem," I said, checking my watch. The bus would arrive in 5 minutes. The daughter helped her mother to her feet, but before they could leave, the old woman's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with shocking force, her blind eyes fixed on my face with eerie precision. "Death," she whispered. "I see death riding with you today." My blood turned cold. The daughter gasped, trying to pry her mother's fingers loose. "Mama, stop! You're scaring her." But the old woman held on, her grip like iron despite her frail appearance. "My mother is a clairvoyant," the daughter said quickly, her voice apologetic but urgent. "She sees things. Sometimes they're true, sometimes... Please, she asked me to tell you, don't get in your husband's car today." I laughed nervously, finally pulling my wrist free. "My husband, I'm taking the bus. I always take the bus. Promise me." The old woman's voice was suddenly strong, commanding. "Promise you won't get in his car, no matter what he says." I promise," I said, more to calm her than anything else. The daughter led her mother away, casting apologetic glances over her shoulder. I stood at the bus stop, my wrist tingling where the old woman had gripped it, my mind racing. It was absurd. Fortune tellers, premonitions. I didn't believe in any of that. The bus arrived, and I climbed aboard, pushing the incident to the back of my mind. I had real problems to deal with. Mikhail had scheduled a meeting for later that afternoon to finalize our legal strategy. The confrontation with Andre and his mother was coming, and I needed to be ready. I spent the morning at work in a daze, the old woman's words echoing in my mind despite my best efforts to ignore them. "Don't get in your husband's car today." Why would she say that? I didn't even drive with Andre anymore, not since I'd discovered his betrayal. We barely spoke, existing in the same house like hostile strangers waiting for war. At noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Andre. "Can you come home? We need to talk. It's important." My fingers hovered over the screen. Every instinct screamed at me not to go, not to be alone with him before Mikhail and Elena were present. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the man I'd married, the man who'd once held my hand and promised forever, wanted to give him one last chance to explain. "I'll take a taxi," I typed back. "No need. I'm outside the library right now. I'll drive you." My heart pounded. The old woman's face flashed in my mind, those milky eyes, that iron grip. "Don't get in your husband's car today." Ridiculous. It was just an old woman with dementia, making random predictions that meant nothing. But my hands were shaking as I packed my bag. I walked outside, and there was Andre's black sedan, engine running, waiting at the curb. He leaned across to open the passenger door, his expression carefully neutral. "Come on," he called. "We need to talk before the lawyers get involved." I stood on the sidewalk, frozen. The old woman's warning rang in my ears like a bell. My rational mind told me this was paranoia, superstition. Andre was my husband. He couldn't. But hadn't he already? Hadn't he already betrayed me in the worst possible way, conspiring with his mother to steal everything I owned? "Inna." Andre's voice held an edge of impatience. "Get in. I don't have all day." My phone buzzed again. A text from Elena. "Mikhail found something. Important. Don't go anywhere alone. I'm coming to get you." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The sudden urgency, the insistence on driving me himself, the carefully blank expression that I'd learned meant he was hiding something. "No," I said quietly. "What?" I said no. I stepped back from the car. "I'm not getting in." Andre's mask slipped. For just a moment, I saw something dark flash across his face. Anger, panic, calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by forced casualness. "Fine. Whatever. I'll meet you at home." He pulled away from the curb too quickly, tires squealing slightly. I watched the car disappear down the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. Elena arrived 15 minutes later, her face pale. "Get in," she said urgently. "Mikhail just discovered something. Your brakes. Someone tampered with your car's brakes last night." "My car's in the shop," I said slowly. "It's been there for a week." "Exactly." Elena's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles were white. "Which is why Andre knew you'd need a ride today. Inna. Mikhail found messages between Andre and his mother. They were going to stage an accident, make it look like you lost control on the mountain road near your house." The world seemed to stop. The old woman's words echoed with new, terrible meaning. "I see death riding with you today." "They were going to kill me," I whispered. "The private investigator checked Andre's car this morning after we saw the messages. The steering linkage has been loosened, not enough to fail immediately, but on a sharp turn, at speed." Elena's voice broke. "It would have looked like an accident, and with you dead, Andre would inherit everything. No lawyers, no court battles, just a grieving widower." The confrontation happened that evening, but not the way Andre had planned. When he arrived home, he found not just me, but Elena, Mikhail, the private investigator, and 2 police detectives waiting in the living room. His face went white when he saw them. What's going on?" "Sit down, Mr. Sokolov," Detective Volkov said calmly. "We have some questions about attempted murder." "Murder?" Andre's voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" Mikhail laid out the evidence with clinical precision. The forged property documents, the bank transfers, the messages between Andre and his mother discussing the final solution to their Inna problem, and finally, the mechanical report on Andre's car, showing deliberate tampering designed to cause a fatal accident. Andre started, then stopped. His eyes darted to the door, calculating escape. But Detective Volkov's partner moved to block the exit. "Where is your mother, Mr. Sokolov?" Volkov asked. I don't know." "She's at the airport," the private investigator said, checking his phone. "Booked a one-way flight to Turkey, leaving in 2 hours. Our associate is keeping eyes on her." Andre crumbled. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no protestations of innocence. He simply folded in on himself, his face collapsing into his hands. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered. "The business? I was drowning. Mom said we could fix it. She said you'd never have to know." "Fix it by killing me?" My voice was ice, every word a shard of glass. "It was supposed to look like an accident." He looked up, and incredibly, his eyes were pleading, as if I should somehow understand, should forgive. "You would have felt nothing, and I would have been able to save the business. pay back the investors. Everyone would have been better off. Everyone except me, I said, because I'd be dead. The detectives arrested him then, read him his rights while he sat on our couch, the couch we'd picked out together 5 years ago, arguing playfully about fabric colors. He didn't resist. As they led him out in handcuffs, he turned back one last time. "I loved you once," he said quietly. "I want you to know that." "But not enough," I replied. "Not nearly enough." Lyudmila Petrovna was arrested at the airport, her luggage filled with cash and jewelry, assets she'd been systematically hiding for months. During interrogation, she showed no remorse. "Inna was holding my son back," she told the detectives coldly. "That house should have been his. I built that boy from nothing, and she was going to ruin him." The trial lasted 4 months. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, suspicious financial transfers, the sabotaged car, and most damningly, dozens of text messages between mother and son discussing every detail of their plan. Andre tried to claim his mother had manipulated him, that he'd been coerced, but the messages painted a different picture. He'd been an eager participant, suggesting the accident scenario himself after a simpler forgery plan had hit legal obstacles. Both were convicted. Andre received 15 years for attempted murder and fraud. Lyudmila Petrovna got 20. Her lack of remorse and status as the primary instigator working against her. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood on my porch in the early morning light, exactly where I'd stood a year ago when this nightmare began. The garden my mother planted was in full bloom, roses, jasmine, and the stubborn wildflowers that grew despite every attempt to organize them. My house was mine again, truly mine, with new locks and alarm systems, and a restraining order that would keep Andre and his mother away even after they served their time. I'd kept my job at the library. The familiar routine, shelving books, helping patrons, the quiet rustle of pages, had been my anchor through the chaos. My colleagues knew something had happened, but they respected my privacy, offering support through knowing glances and the occasional wordless hug. Elena visited every Sunday. We'd have breakfast on this porch, talking about nothing and everything. She'd tried to get me to date again, but I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild easily. Sometimes I thought about the blind old woman at the bus stop. I'd tried to find her afterward, to thank her, to ask how she'd known. But the bus stop was always empty, and none of the regular commuters remembered seeing her. Maybe she'd been real. Maybe she'd been something else. The universe itself, reaching down to offer a warning. I'd never know for sure. What I did know was this. I'd stood at a crossroads between death and life, between trust and survival, and I'd chosen survival. Not because of mystical premonitions or divine intervention, but because I'd learned to trust my own instincts. I'd learned that love without respect is poison, that family isn't always blood, that the strongest walls are the ones you build yourself. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the porch boards beneath my bare feet. A bird sang from the apple tree my father had planted when I was 6. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. I was alive. My house was mine. And I was finally, completely free. That blind fortune teller's daughter had warned me not to get in my husband's car that day. But the real warning had come much earlier, in every small betrayal, every lie, every moment when my intuition screamed that something was wrong and I chose to ignore it. I wouldn't ignore it again. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me, and allowed myself something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The knowledge that I'd survived, that I'd fought, and that I'd won. The blind woman had seen death riding with me that day, but death had passed me by, claimed instead the marriage that was already dead, the trust that could never be revived, the version of myself who'd been too afraid to fight back, and in death's wake, I'd found something I'd thought I'd lost: myself.